Stop what you're doing. It's time for cheerful history banter with Alex and Abs of the History Tellers.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is History Tellers Online. And of course, it doesn't work with just me. It has to work with Mr. Burnham. Mr. Burnham, are you there? There he is.
I'm here. Hello, Mr. Wisdom.
Burnham. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. Just lounging around the house in my History Teller's coat and hat, as always.
Well, yes. So what we've thought, ladies and gents, of the History Tellers clan is that there's no point trying to do what we do, standing up doing a show. It's never going to work. So we thought Alex and me just going to have a bit of a banter. And we obviously are doing this on Zoom from our relative houses. So obviously I live like this all the time, obviously. Yep. My house is just, well, it is actually full of old crap like this, to be
Most of the time it is, anyway.
So, Mr. Burnham, are you enjoying living La Vida Lockdown then? Are you having a good time?
Yeah, it's all right, to be honest. Nice weather.
Yeah.
Plenty of time to sit at home and do stuff.
Yeah, I built a wall today and various other things. So I've been making things for our big History Tellers projects, which are still meant to be happening. So have you been thinking about history stuff, Mr. Burnham?
Always thinking about history stuff. That's pretty much all I do.
Well, look, why don't we just banter some history stuff to each other? And have a little bit of a natter. Now, I was going to sort of, if you don't mind, can I kick the ball?
Go for it. You start.
What I was going to say, ladies and gents, is I was going to do a little bit of kind of what's happened this week. And one thing that did happen was this week is that some of you, if you ever went to an English Heritage show and you saw a brilliant female jouster called Nikki Willis, well, sadly she died, and she was like the first top class female jouster since, well, ever really, and she was like super well known and super lovely. So we take our hats off to Nikki Willis, who was just a fantastic lady, and sadly she's passed on, and I'm sure she's having great fun with people like the Duke de Berry and all the famous jousters of the past up there in the other place. So Nikki,
rail in the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. What else happened this week, Alex? Well, I was looking at the news and I discovered a little bit of factoid, if I may, about Apollo 13. Apollo 13. You are familiar with the film, I presume, Mr. Burnham?
Yes, and the spacecraft.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the film, what is the most famous quote?
What, the Houston, we have a problem?
Aha, I knew you'd say that. And do you know what? It isn't what was said on the day that the incident happened. It was not said. What actually happened was Jack Swigert, the command module pilot, he stirred the tanks and he operated the oxygen sort of warming system. And there he had this little explosion, or quite big explosion. And he said, Houston, we've had a problem. We've, as in, it's just happened. And then Houston came back and just went, can you sort of go, what was that, 13? And then Jim Lovell jumps in and he says, yeah, Houston, we've had a problem. Which, of course, is not at all what is said in the film. And in the film, I did a little bit of research on this. They say, Houston, we have a problem. And that's Tom Hanks saying it, of course. Never actually said. And it's because we've had a problem doesn't have the same sort of drama and excitement as we have a problem.
It's no different to one small step for a man, is it? It's
absolutely. Yeah, which never sounded completely right anyway. But yeah, that's exactly right. Allegedly, that's what he meant to say. And if he did say it, the A is lost in that little blip of radio traffic. 39,000 miles away. So my bit of news is that oft misquoted Apollo 13 came back to Earth after its miraculous, it has to be said, sort of saving in space. Apollo 13's anniversary was 50 years ago this week, just gone. What about you, Mr. B? Have you got a story that you can tell us?
Yeah, I just want to tag on to that one briefly, because I noticed that Apollo 13 and Yuri Gagarin's first space flight happened within a day or two of each other, sort of earlier in April. And I thought that's really interesting because that's about a decade of space advancement.
Absolutely.
The first man to a repeat visit to the moon.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I think is quite an interesting little sort of chunk
No,
of time.
It is, absolutely. I mean, as you know, I'm a bit of a spacey geek anyway. And I think the Apollo 13 thing just sort of flashed by, really. People didn't really give it a huge amount of thought.
No.
But it was, in a very great way. It was an enormous great achievement. And the average age of the people in that room who were saving the day, 29 years old.
Very good.
29.
Yeah.
Almost as young as you, Mr. Burnham.
Almost, yeah.
Go on then, hit me with something else.
Well, I'm going to really again, when we started sort of thinking about this, I sort of looked at what had happened in the news, and then we've taken a long time to get there. Ooh, wrong picture. No, still the wrong picture. Go back. There we go.
I was meant to do that.
Yeah, we looked at what was happening in the news, and then we couldn't figure out how to do these chats, so it took us a bit longer. But I noticed that there were two things that happened sort of over 2 days that I sort of found quite interesting. On the 14th of April, Titanic hits an iceberg,
yep,
and Abraham Lincoln gets shot. And then on the 15th, Titanic sinks and Lincoln dies. And I just thought it was interesting that those two things...
Synchronicity.
Yeah, sort of happened over the 2 days. So you don't really know which one this day in history. Do you go with the shot and the died and the hit or the sunk? It was just an interesting little...
yeah, absolutely. I was looking at some news, talking about Lincoln being shot. I was looking at some news where they were talking to Trump supporters in America and asking them what was the name of the man who shot Lincoln. And I had to stop and pause. And I usually used to know that. Do you know that one? Do you know the name of the guy?
John Wilkes Booth.
John Wilkes Booth. I kept on saying William Booth, and of course because of the Wilkes bit. But I was still better, even saying William Booth, than the man who went no. And they said to him, "Do you know who Scooby Doo's mate is?" And he went, "Oh, Shaggy, obviously." And I just thought, I'm not even an American, and I know a little bit more about your history than the average Trump supporter.
Can you quote what Wilkes Booth shouted when he jumped onto the stage after shooting Lincoln?
Take that bloody hat off in the theatre. I can't see the stage.
Very close. Sic semper tyrannis. Death to all tyrants.
Oh, really?
So there you go.
Oh, very good. Excellent.
I'm sure we've gone off track, but that's fine.
No, off track is great. This is our history banter, and hey, why not, So go on then. If you have a story, hit me with a story. Hit me with a nice history story.
Well, I've got a sort of little question I'm going to ask you. And see whether you can get it or not. It's a bit sort of specialist. Which country, and I'll even give you a century, this is the 17th century.
Yep.
Which country banned beards?
Now, in the back of my mind... Hang on. No, do you know, I want to say Russia.
Oh, that's it.
Is it really?
Russia.
In the back of my mind, I cannot tell you why. I filed that under miscellaneous in the back of my head.
Very good.
I cannot tell you why. Why Russia?
A 1698 banning of beards, where it was basically a tax, to be honest. So if you had a beard, you had to pay to have a tax, a beard license. I have here. I have a picture of a beard token. That was on one side, and then on the other, this lovely little goatee sort of inscription.
That's
These
very
are
good.
like coins, and you'd get that if you paid your beard tax, which allowed you, and it was basically different stratas of society had to pay a different amount for the amount of beard they had, and it was just a way of gaining some money and that sort of thing. So yeah, a 1698 beard tax. Emperor Peter I enforced it.
I love that. I love that beard tax.
And I love these little tokens as well.
I think that's brilliant. I love the little modelled beard and the moustache. That's just
exactly,
great.
Now, there is a theory that Britain had a beard tax, that King Henry VIII brought a beard tax in, but there's very little hard evidence for it. So I'm going to say it's probably not true. But there's this idea that Henry VIII brought in a beard tax despite having a beard himself.
Very good.
So,
that's a great little factoid, Mr. Burnham.
That's what I thought. A nice little... Nothing, anything. Yeah, there you go.
I think that's a very good one. That's substantially that's a very good story. It's kicked off our history banter in a very good way. Well, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed that little one. We've got a quiz for you now, and I thought we would give you some quiz questions. So number one quiz question from me, Abs History Teller, is, and write these down, get yourself a pen and paper, answers at the end, is who was Franz von Vera, W-E-R-R-A? And we'll be asking that question now. We'll be answering that question a little bit later on. Alex, have you got a question for our good History Tellers fans?
I have, and it's a question testing those to see if people ever listen to me when I'm doing my talks and demonstrations. I'm going to ask, who invented the wet collodion form of photography?
That is a good question. You have said that a million times.
It's something I say regularly, and nobody will ever remember.
I do not know the answer to that one. Very good. And my second question is, what was Marengo? Marengo. There is a very particular thing that Marengo was, and that's my second question. There'll be another question a little bit later on. Alex, have you got another question for our good people?
I have. I've got a second question, and it's a multiple choice here. Which of the following was not an operational aircraft of the Royal Air Force or Royal Flying Corps? The Dolphin, the Woodcock, the Flycatcher, or the Bobolink?
Ah, very good.
Which of those was not an operational aircraft for the Royal Flying Corps or Air Force?
Very good.
Dolphin, Woodcock, Flycatcher, or Bobolink?
Very good. That is a very good question. Well, we'll be doing those a little bit later on. So I'm going to hit you with a story now, Alex, and it is a story of lockdown. So it's a little bit current. If you think you're climbing the walls because you're stuck in, I want you to think about the man in my next story, which is... Oh, how do I do it again?
You need to have History Tellers cards between each picture.
I did. I swear I did. And that's what I thought I did. Anyway, ladies and gents, I got there in the end. So let me introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, here to this man here, who is Trooper Patrick Fowler. Born in Dublin, he was of the 11th Hussars in World War One. And at the moment, you're just going, okay, it's a World War One story. It is, but with a difference. You see, in 1914, at the Battle of La Cateau, Patrick was cut off in France from his unit, and as a result, he was stuck behind German lines. And the Germans obviously overran the position where he was in, so he lived for 5 months in the woods, underneath sort of the noses of the Germans. And then one day, sort of in early February 1915, or early January, I should say, he was discovered living in the woods by a man called Louis Basquin. And he took him to a farmhouse and said, look, we've found this British cavalry trooper living in the woods all throughout all of the winter of 14 into 15. He's in a bad way. Can we do something about it? Now, you would have expected a lesser person to sit there and go, yeah, we can hand him over to the Germans. No. Instead, she hides him in a cupboard. Which is, this is a woman called Madame Belmont-Gobert and her daughter Angèle. They hide him in a cupboard. There is the cupboard. And they hide him in this cupboard, which is 5'6" by 20 inches wide.
Okay.
Where he stays for all of the war. Well,
all of the war.
All of the war. Well, virtually. Basically, what happens is she hides him in this cupboard, which he has to sort of like get in like this. He's a fully grown man, I'd like to add, obviously. And he just gets in the cupboard and he just sits in the cupboard. Things get worse where pretty soon after he's climbed into this living cupboard, 16 Germans get billeted into the house with him. So he's now living in a cupboard with 16 Germans on the other side of the cupboard door. Now, he can only come out at night, presumably to eat something, go to the loo, and he sneaks around in this reasonably large farmhouse with this woman risking life by putting him up. And he lives in this cupboard for a considerable amount of time with these 16 Germans literally on the other side of the cupboard door. And he's completely silent and he lives like that. Now, things get worse when the Germans then say, right, nice farmhouse in the rear. We're going to requisition it for German officers. We found you a cottage down the road to live in, madame. And she goes, oh, very good. Thank you. But I will need all my furniture. And they say, of course, no problem at all. We will get the Germans to move it.
Including the wardrobe.
Including the wardrobe, with the trooper in the wardrobe covered with a mattress.
Ooh,
and the Germans
you've got
don't
some heavy shirts in here, madam.
The Germans do not bother opening the cupboard door and having a look inside.
Why would you?
She says she has a premonition that the Germans might search the cupboard. If they did search the cupboard, what they would have found is a mattress at the bottom of it and him lying under the mattress. So they lift the cupboard up with Trooper Fowler in it, and they carry it to the cottage. And now the Germans aren't there, he can live with a little bit more openness. He lives in this farmhouse until this cottage rather, in and out of the cupboard, presumably when people come round just to check on what's going on. And in this time, the Germans, are obviously in the area. Come 1918, the Allies overrun that position, and he then declares himself back to the 11th Hussars, who just go, hang on, weren't you missing for 4 years? Are you a deserter? At which point he says, no, I've been living in a cupboard. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, at this point, they would sit there and go, no, you're a deserter. But the woman comes forward and goes, no, he's absolutely been living in my farmhouse cupboard for, 4 years on and off. And they say, that's fine, not charged with desertion. The 11th Hussars think that she's absolutely brilliant. She is given an Officer of the Order of the British Empire medal, but by 1927, she is living in poverty. So the Daily Telegraph stump up a large sort of charity thing for her, and the 11th Hussars also give her 100 quid. Quite a lot of money in 1927, I'd like to add. And the French government are so sort of ashamed of what has happened. They say, well, she's never going to need any money again. We are going to give her a pension. And she also receives from the British government his full billeting pay, despite the fact he lived in a cupboard. Now, I can hear you saying, why hasn't this been turned into a movie?
Why, Abs, has this not been turned into a movie?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because they were going to turn it into a movie in the year 2000 with Robert Carlyle playing this chap. Never happened. It never happened at all. And this got me thinking about men and indeed women living in confined spaces to avoid capture. There is a guy in the Battle of Arnhem who is an officer. He climbs into a corner cupboard, literally corner cupboard, and he kind of sits in it like this to avoid the Germans, who then pitch up in the ruined building on the opposite side of the cupboard door. And he's literally in this corner cupboard like this, just hoping, don't go for the condiments, don't go for the condiments. Because he is literally in his Denison smock and his para helmet on the other side of the door. But the best story that this has been compared to is of a lady called Harriet Jacobs, who in the Americas in the 19th century, she lived in a crawl space in a roof for 7 years to avoid her, 7 years to avoid her slave owner who was abusing her. And she basically disappeared. And she lived in her mother's house. She ran away and she lived in her mother's house. And everybody has said that is an amazing story. So yeah, Harriet Jacobs, 7 years in a crawl space in a roof. And this guy here, Trooper Fowler, brilliant. And that cupboard, you can still see it to this day in Winchester. And there we have the daughter and the mother. Those are the people who looked after Trooper Fowler. So what an amazing story that is.
It's a good story, and I'm surprised it's not a film, because it's really sort of, there's only one set inside cupboard. So it's really cheap to make.
Absolutely. Very good indeed. Now, hopefully, I've got a history teller's picture. There we go. I did get it right after all. Right. Very good. I've got another quiz question for our friends.
Go on then.
Well, actually, all right. I've got another quiz question.
Go on then.
So, sorry about that. I was pausing just for a moment because I was looking at my sort of script. This is very weird for us to have scripts because, as the public may know, we never have scripts.
We may practice.
Yes. Actually, you can see why people do it. And my third quiz question, ladies and gents, is David Leibovitz and Kimberly Miller had a rather claustrophobic wedding, which was to go overboard about, bit of a clue there, in 2001. Where did their wedding happen? That is my third quiz question. Alex, do you have a quiz question?
I've got one final quiz question for this episode of History Tellers Talking Nonsense in Their Bedrooms, which is, what is technically the last castle built in the UK?
Oh, it's a good one. It's a good
It is.
one.
What's the last castle built within the UK? Technically,
Oh, I
I'll
like
explain
that.
the technically when we do the answer.
That is
It's one of those sort of slightly cheaty answers, but there you
cool.
go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are watching Alex and Abs have cheerful history banter. We'll be back in just a moment.
History Tellers Lockdown chit-chat.
All right, hello there, folks. Welcome back to us. I'm Alex, that's Abs of the History Tellers. You might remember us from real life. We might be back there one day again. And now I've got a little, it sort of links into sort of this month in history. I wanted to say this day, but it isn't this day. It was a while ago, and people can watch this video whenever they like. But when we recorded this, we were recording this quite sort of close to the anniversary of the Battle of Culloden. I'm sure you're aware of that. That was the 16th of April, not so long ago, the Battle of Culloden. And it sort of links into a little sort of, well, partial mystery and then sort of an interesting little fact. Now, are you aware, Mr. Wisdom, of the song, the very popular song in Scotland, I'm told, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean?
My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Yes, I do. I know that one.
That's exactly right. Now, are you aware of the theory of what this story is, this song is sort of pertaining to?
Now, is it about, I've heard, now, Bonnie, is it Bonnie Prince Charlie meant to be sailing around and he's going away after the Battle of Culloden? But that is as much as I really know.
Well, this is one of the theories. However, there is no evidence for it other than the name Bonnie appears in Bonnie Prince Charlie.
Okay.
So nobody really knows where the song comes from. It was written, they think, possibly similar sort of time to Culloden. It might have existed as a folk song and that sort of thing. But there's no real hard evidence of it until you get into the Victorian period. So a chap in 1881, I've got his name somewhere, American Charles E. Pratt, he hears this song, realizes how popular it is, and says, oh, well, if I write the sheet music for this, people will buy the sheet music and I'll make lots of money because they're already singing the song. There's no real copyright laws back then to stop him doing this.
Yep.
So he collates My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean as part of his sort of like songbook that you can buy, makes lots of money from it, and all is well and good. But this is sort of big Victorian, so quite a way after the Battle of Culloden. So nobody knows if it actually is, like you said, you know, Bonnie over the ocean, you know, coming back to me, that sort of thing. Could be. Could also just be me, as in my beautiful girl or whatever, is over the ocean. It could be like an emigrant or somebody who's
completely believable, yeah.
Yeah, who knows? To be honest, the song sort of becomes, in Scotland particularly, apparently, I've not checked with any Scottish people, but apparently it's sort of one of those national folk songs that everybody just knows and it's part of the culture. It goes on being like this. And then we hit the 1950s. Now, in the 1950s, lots of bands, rock and roll bands, didn't want to pay money for songs to be written, couldn't write themselves, and so were arranging traditional tunes with rock and roll sort of beats and releasing them, you know, quite quickly and cheaply and that sort of thing. No royalties to pay as such because it's a traditional song, so they just get some more money. It's a nice, easy one to do. Over in Germany, a guitarist and singer called Tony Sheridan picks up this My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, records it, and releases it as My Bonnie, and it sort of starts as a bit of an Elvis crooner number and then turns into like a high upbeat tempo sort of rock and roll thing. We will put the link to this in the sort of comments of our video on
absolutely,
YouTube,
okay,
so people can go and find it, or they can just search Tony Sheridan, My Bonnie, he called it.
Right.
It's quite a nice little rock and roll song, but it's billed as Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. Now, the Beat Brothers is where it's interesting because it's a small group of Liverpudlian musicians who are working over in Germany who just happened to know Tony Shepherd, and he needed a band for this, and so they went and they played on the backing track. Now, they were called the Beat Brothers for this because in German, the name Beatles is very close to a term for a bit of male anatomy, and they didn't want that on their record. So they got renamed as the Beat Brothers, and so there you hear Tony Sheridan with the Beatles backing him, not Ringo. He wasn't in the Beatles at that point.
No, because it was
the other one.
Pete Best.
Could be.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Think it was yeah. Yeah.
But anyway,
tell us.
Somebody will tell us. I'm sure there'll be a comment telling us.
Absolutely. Pick us up in the comments on that because we're struggling.
Yeah. So you have Tony Sheridan with the Beat Brothers, which is Lennon, McCartney, and I think Harrison. And in fact, this is the first sort of like recording of the Beatles. Doesn't do a thing over in this country, not even listened to. Gets to number 5 in the German charts, however, so it does reasonably well over there.
Brilliant.
And for years, people have sort of been, oh, wow, the first Beatles recording. Isn't that guitar solo brilliant? And it's quite a nice little guitar solo on there. And everyone goes, oh, George Harrison was good even back then. It's not actually George Harrison playing it. It is Tony Sheridan. So he completely gets forgotten and the Beatles sort of go on to fame. But I'm sure Tony Sheridan, he probably remained friends with the Beatles and had his own little following and everything, but he's not quite up there with Lennon. But I just thought that was a nice,
that is a brilliant story.
Rambling story.
Excellent. No, I like that. I like that very much indeed. I hope you like that as well, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back after this little tiny History Tellers advert.
History Chat with Abs and Alex.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are Abs and Alex of the History Tellers. We're doing a bit of chatter in lockdown. And Mr. Wisdom, you have changed your appearance somewhat. Do you want to tell me a little bit about why you're dressed in that rather ridiculous get-up?
Oh, well, you say it. Hang on a moment.
Oh, it's horrible. It's terrible. Oh, put the mask back on.
Right, you say ridiculous get-up, and you'd be right, because that was my plague doctor's outfit.
Ah, okay.
So there's loads of people at the moment, including some clown who turned up while Emily Maitlis was doing a thing outside Parliament before lockdown, and he thought it would be hilarious to dress as a 17th century plague doctor, wearing some dreadful replica mask. So I thought, I'm going to look into this story of what plague doctors were. Everybody goes, oh, plague doctors, oh, yeah. So I thought I'd look into a bit of this.
From what I remember, those masks, theoretically, had sort of some sweet-smelling somethings in the nose. Was that correct?
It was. Let me just bring up the picture that everybody goes on about. Now, I have to say, when I was a younger man, I was asked to do a photo shoot for a book on the life of a doctor. So if anybody has the Heinemann book, A Doctor's Life, I'm the plague doctor in that. And
we all have that book.
Yeah, I am wearing this outfit, basically, but I'm wearing the one that was made for Robert Downey Jr. when he was about 29 in the movie Restoration. And it was beautifully made. He's tiny compared with me, because I'm 6'2". He must be very small, with a tiny head as well, because it hardly fitted me. But nevertheless, everybody goes, oh yeah, plague doctor. So I thought I'd look into what plague doctors actually were. So this is the look that we are familiar with the plague doctor. There's a hat, there's a sort of a beak thing, there's a long coat, there's gloves and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, right, let's look back and find out a little bit about what these people really were. And if you trace it back, there's possibly this one. That's the only real evidence we have for this get-up. Because there's only one real description of it. And all these other people going, oh, I'm going to be one of the millions of plague doctors wearing a pointy mask. There's one description that's by a guy called Charles Lorme, Lorme, in 1630. He was a French doctor in the 17th century.
Was he even in England, or was he?
No, he was in France. He was in France. No, he was in France. And he was the court physician to kind of people like Louis XIII and stuff like that. Now, a little bit current. He prescribed putting toxic chemicals in your body. But in fairness to him, it's the 17th century. And he was suggesting a drink containing antimony, which is put into lead, and it's also used in makeup a lot in Roman times. It can possibly give you cancer, but equally well, it can poison you, but it isn't like deadly poison. Not like bleach, basically. But, in fairness to him, it's quite a while ago and medicine is in its infancy. So, I will prepare to cut him some slack. Now, he prescribes in the plagues of the many plagues that are going around in the 17th century to what was called miasma theory. And miasma theory was that anything that smelled nasty had disease coming out of it, and it was in the air. The disease was in the air. So he proposed a suit, a hazmat suit in the 17th century to stop you getting the miasma, the plague, on you. And I've got a quote here, which I'm going to read you, of his description of how the suit is going to be made. So what he said was, the nose is 1/2 foot long, shaped like a beak, filled with perfume, as you said. Under the coat, we wear boots made in Moroccan leather and a short-sleeved blouse a short-sleeved blouse in smooth leather. The hat and the gloves in the same skin and spectacles over the eyelids. And the whole coat was to be waxed and covered in suet and fat. So it was very shiny, very smooth. Shiny, so the particles of disease didn't stick to it. So if you had a woolen coat, the disease...
History time with the History Tellers.
So
the History Tellers.
Shiny material that could be washed off or rinsed down, and the material that the disease material wouldn't stick to it, which I think is pretty clever. Now, as you said, the beak held herbs, and sometimes they would light these herbs, and these herbs would then sort of smoke, and you could then sort of go into the house of plague and look at the people suffering from the plague. And I guess that sort of scented beak was to basically
filter effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, so you didn't have to smell the filth and the no doubt the no doubt unpleasant smells of decay and possibly people who are already passed on, sadly. So there's your evidence, and you may sit there and go, well, that's brilliant, isn't it? Except there's loads of duff history going around. Now, there were plague doctors at this period. There's plague doctors in Edinburgh, but they might just have been like ordinary blokes in ordinary sets of clothing going around and going, that man's got the plague. They didn't all look like that. However,
communication back then wasn't great. So if one guy in France comes up with this idea, plague doctors in Edinburgh are not going to get that memo for a long time.
Absolutely. And also, they may not prescribe perhaps to miasma theory, or if they do, they might have a completely different view of how to protect yourself. I'm going to just cover myself in a bucket of antimony or whatever. That will make it safer. So here we have a plague mask in a museum. And to go, oh, look at that, that's authentic. Look, it's got a beak 1/2 foot long. It's made of leather. It's made of cloth. That's brilliant, isn't it? Do you know the provenance of that?
Where's that from?
No one knows. Nobody knows. It's a thing that got discovered. Somebody walked into the museum, effectively, and just went, I've got this. And they went, that's amazing. What's the story of it? I don't know. It's just a thing, isn't it? So this is what I mean about duff history. It's in a museum, and it's got a thing underneath saying plague doctor's mask. And if you Google that image on the web, it'll say plague doctor's mask. But there's no real evidence that this is the real deal, or this was even made. And if you want to see one in use, Robert Downey Jr.'s one in restoration. Doesn't exist in any museums at the moment. It's a beautiful thing. But watch the movie. We'll put a link in the comments to the clip on YouTube of him stuffing it full. It's a wonderful thing. And so plague doctors, I've got a little bit of a problem with people sitting there going, oh, plague doctors, they're definitely, that's what they all wore.
It's like we often say, it's this sort of popular hits of history. People know these facts, but they're not always what they seem to be.
Yeah, and also in the world of kind of reenactment, it gets sort of built up. There's absolutely no reason that people shouldn't talk about that mask and say this was something that was proposed to use in France. I think the story of having an anti-miasma coat with all the wax and it's a brilliant story. Just don't absolutely say it happened in Britain, because the only primary evidence we've got for it is that picture, which I think is French, as I say, or even Italian, so it may be, it may not be the real deal. I don't think that picture is actually what he proposed. That picture may even be a later picture based on his original text. We simply do not know. What we do know is...
Yeah, that one in the museum really reminds me of like the Victorian mermaids that were found. And it was people sort of taking monkey skeletons and fish tails and gluing them together to make a thing. And then later on, people find these things and go, "Oh, look, I found a mummified mermaid."
Exactly.
It's just a made-up thing.
I mean, it's a cool-looking thing, but just Google plague doctor, and you will come out with millions of them being made, and people using Venetian carnival masks and all of that kind of stuff. No evidence at all of them in Britain whatsoever. So, yeah, it's a great thing, but I'm calling it duff history, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I had a history teller's picture there as well. I haven't done very well here, have I, on my little graphic?
No. Next time.
Shall we do our answers to our questions?
We can do, certainly.
Right. So, ladies and gents, if you want your answers, get your papers ready. Don't cheat. You're only cheating yourself, ladies and gents. So, yeah. All right. Question number 1. Who was Franz von Vera? Anybody? Alex, do you happen to know? Franz von Vera. Fighter pilot, shot down, German fighter pilot, shot down. He is the only man who makes a home run. He gets back to Germany. Yeah, or at least he gets into out of Allied captivity, and he gets into Germany, and he wrote a book called The One That Got Away. So yeah, Franz von Vera is a German who did escape from Allied captivity. Many Allies did it from German captivity, but only one German ever did it from Allied captivity, and it's Franz von Vera. So he's a fighter pilot who gets shot down and makes it back
to Germany itself.
Well, that I will check once again. I think he ends up in Canada, in prison, and then he gets back to Germany and is lauded as a big hero. But I'm going to have to check that. But
more to that story. There is more.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. If you know any more details on that, fans, do hit that comment button and come back to us. Alex, question.
Very good. Well, my question was about the photographer who invented wet plate or wet collodion photography. And anybody who can remember anything I've ever said will know it was Frederick Scott Archer who invented the wet collodion photography, came up with that process that I've demonstrated millions of times at events and things around the country.
So what did Fox Talbot do then?
He invented the calotype earlier, but it was a bit of a rubbish system. So Frederick Scott Archer, he improved it with his wet collodion thing. He gifted this to the world by writing the process and publishing it in like a journal, so anybody could go and do it for free, which meant that he then died penniless because he made no money from his invention.
Oh dear.
Which is often the way with these things, but we owe him a lot in terms of photography down the years.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Well, my second question, History Tellers fans, is what was Marengo? Mr. Burnham, do you know this one?
I've no idea who Marengo is or was or could be.
Marengo was Napoleon's horse, which you can see, certainly last time I saw it, was in the National Army Museum. The skeleton of this horse is in the National Army Museum, and it is, Napoleon's horse. Now, everybody goes on about Napoleon being very, very small. I don't think he was that small, but his horse... not big. It's not a big horse. It's not a great, massive, great structure. And you look at these bones and you think, not the biggest horse in the world, but maybe Napoleon just preferred little, smaller, lighter horses who did their thing. Yeah, so Marengo is Napoleon's horse, the bones of which were and still are in the National Army Museum in Chelsea in London.
Oh, very good. It makes me think of over in America, they've got, I think, Stonewall Jackson's horse, which was sort of skinned and stuffed and is in a museum somewhere as well.
I was doing some quiz questions a few days ago about horses and like famous horses, and I had Lee's horse, which I think was called Traveller, and Grant's horse, and he had several that he liked. And I'm just trying to remember the name of his horse. It was something like Scout or something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember his horse.
No, it's in one of my quiz scripts, but so there were loads. Do you know whose horse was Ronald, by the way?
No, that's a good name for a horse.
It's a great name for a horse. That was the horse Lord Cardigan rode in the charge of the Light Brigade.
Oh,
his horse was called Ronald.
Excellent.
Which was excellent indeed. Yeah, Ronald.
Excellent. Very good.
Brilliant name for a horse.
Now, my next question was the aircraft names, I think. I might have got this the wrong way around, but I think it was the aircraft name.
It was.
So, out of my options, the Dolphin, the Woodcock, the Flycatcher, and the Bobolink, which of those was not an operational aircraft?
Now, I know a little bit about my World War II planes, and none of those are World War II names, I don't think. So they are either post-war or pre-war. They're certainly not World War One, because that is something I do know about. So
one of them is World War One.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm putting these in that weird sort of silver painted kind of between the wars period, which means I have no answer.
Okay.
Go on.
We'll start then with the First World War aircraft. This was genuinely in a fighter in the First World War. It was the Sopwith Dolphin.
Yeah.
Average-looking biplane, to be honest. Nothing.
Yeah, it's very Sopwith tail on that, I have to say.
Yes, yeah. So that was the Sopwith Dolphin. That was a fighter in the First World War, towards the end, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing really amazing about that. I'm somehow getting subtitles coming up on the bottom. There we go. That's better.
There we go.
Yes. So that's pretty good.
Is that a single-seater or a two-seater?
A single-seater. But what interests me is this sort of
staggered wing.
Well, the gun seems to be sticking up at a random angle for no particular. I don't know.
I'll tell you why that is. If you look at the angle of that gun, that is above his propeller blade, and I reckon that is for just coming in underneath people and breaking them with fire. Because if you remember on the SE-5A, Albert Ball set his top wing gun at an angle so he could come underneath aircraft that just didn't know he was there and just open fire. I bet that they've done the same thing there on the Dolphin. And they've set that gun at if not at a fixed angle, at an angle that can change. But
it could also be just that they pull it back to reload or something. It looks like it's got others in the engine cowling there.
Is that a Lewis gun?
I think so, yes.
They are notoriously bad at fitting interrupter gear to. So I reckon that can't be interrupted to fire through the propeller. Synchronized. So I reckon that is in fixed position, something else to look at afterwards. I reckon that is a fixed position for coming up underneath people and raking them with gunfire.
Could be. Yeah. So there we go.
There you go. So I didn't know that one.
No, operational in the First World War. Next up, we have the Fairy Flycatcher.
No, that's a handsome looking aircraft.
It's not bad, is it? This is a 20s carrier-borne bomber.
Carrier-borne?
Wow. Yes, used off early sort of aircraft carrier, 20s to sort of like early 30s sort of period. So you're probably similar to your Swordfishers and that sort of thing, but not one of those names that really jumps out and grabs you. Because it was one of those, like you said, silver between the wars, short sort of service period, gets rather forgotten, but it's quite an interesting little thing, I thought. Yeah. Interesting, the Flycatcher. Then we have the Hawker Woodcock.
That needs bigger wheels. Those, I don't. That looks like they just went. What wheels have we got? Oh, I'm afraid we've only got them from a much smaller aircraft. Stick those on, they'll be fine.
Yes, these are the caster wheels off the piano in the Hawker.
That looks horrible.
Yeah,
that aircraft, that is never going to look right.
Well, interesting. It is an ugly aircraft, and it became a night fighter in the 20s. So obviously they didn't even want to look at it back then.
No one had to look at it. They just
that's it. Nights where you couldn't see it.
See how horrible the wheels were.
That's right. So there you go. That's the Hawker Woodcock, which only leaves us with the Bobolink.
No way!
Bolton Paul Bobolink.
Bolton Paul from Norwich, near where I live.
Well, it was a failed. They built one prototype. It went up against things like the Camel in the First World War, in the when they put out the tender, and didn't win the tender. And so only that one was ever made. And I haven't got one of those sort of lovely drawings of it because nobody cares because it was only ever made in a single prototype.
You know what that
but it's very similar to the Camel and other Sopwith aircraft of the time.
Do you know what that looks like to me? It looks like a bigger version of the Newport 17.
Very similar.
It's very Newport. Look at that front end; is very Newport with that narrow cowling. Then the wings. What do the rings remind you of?
Well, big and square, aren't they? That's sort of very SE5.
They look like pup wings. That's very similar arrangement to pup wings. Those V struts, very Newport. Are they V? Oh no, they're not, are they?
No, they're more like Sopwith 1.5 strutter sort of style.
Yeah,
so basically they've taken all the ideas and.
It's not an unattractive aircraft.
It's a bit, it's vanilla, isn't it? There's nothing amazing about it, but there's nothing really wrong with it either.
Why you might have said this? Why didn't it get anywhere?
Because against the competition, it was up against things like the Camel, which was just a better performing aircraft. So it just never got made.
So they were all aeroplanes?
They were all aeroplanes, but only this wasn't operational. You see, that I was tricking you.
Yeah, very good.
I found it really interesting looking into it might be a subject I come back to in later episodes of History Tellers Lockdown Chat, was the naming of aircraft. Now, you notice there I had dolphin, obviously a sea animal.
Yeah.
And then you had woodcock, flycatcher and bobolink, which are all birds.
Oh, okay. I didn't know what bobolink was.
No, I didn't either. I had to look that one up. But there is a system of how aircraft got named, and it's not a hard and fast, but you often get different types of names for different types of aircraft. So I think it might be something we come back to in a future episode.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, I'll give you I haven't got a picture for this one, but then to be quite honest, it wouldn't have been a particularly good picture anyway. My question, if you remember, was David Leibovitz and Kimberly Miller had a claustrophobic wedding to go overboard about in 2001. Where did it happen? Any guesses?
I'm going to guess overboard, claustrophobic. It's something diving bell related.
It is. It's really tasteless because they had it on the bow of the Titanic.
Ah,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Genuinely.
it is absolutely true. So they won. They were scuba divers, and they won a competition in 2001 run by a company called Subsea Explorer. And Subsea Explorer said, "Oh, you're getting married. Oh, you've won our competition. Do you want to get married on the bow of the Titanic, where Jack and Rose do the whole this thing in the movie? Because of course that rail is still there, 12,000 feet down, where the pressure, if the window broke, could cut you in half like a laser." And they went, "Yeah, that'd be great." So they go down wearing fireproof suits in a high pressure environment in one of the Russian submersibles that James Cameron used to make the opening scenes of his movie, so they can get down to the Titanic, and they've done major amounts of exploring. While the Russian supply ship hovers over on the surface 12,000 feet above, they had their rings ready. Obviously, they've got the pilot of the submersible, and they're sitting on the deck of the Titanic. How rubbish is this? Whereupon the captain of the Queen Elizabeth II liner, who had been sort of brought in for the job, because captains can marry people at sea, if you remember.
I'm not convinced that's true, but carry on.
Yeah, and he is on board the Russian support vessel, and he then conducts the service and says, "You may kiss the bride." And under a ridiculous sort of sonar radio transmission, they hear this kind of, "Kiss the bride." And they hear this sort of ridiculous radio traffic coming from the deck of the Titanic. So yeah, in 2001, completely legal marriage on the blooming bow of the Titanic. So David Leibovitz and Kimberly Miller, I hope you had a happy wedding, happy marriage, but it's a really tasteless thing to do.
It is a bit, but there you go.
It's absolutely horrible. I think it's absolutely tasteless. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That was our quiz.
I've got a question.
Well, sorry, my apologies, mate.
That's all right. My last one was the last castle built in the UK.
That is a cracker. Sorry, yeah.
So do you have any idea, Mr. Wisdom, of the last castle?
Now, a few...
Now, remember I said technically.
Yeah. A few years ago, well, I say a few years ago, it's probably 25 years ago, a mate of mine was going to buy a Tudor castle made of red brick. Mm-hmm. And we all sat there and went, "Oh, it didn't really look like a castle. Is it really a castle?" And that, I can't remember where it was. It might have been Herstmonceux or somewhere like that. So I'm going to say it's a Tudor castle, and I'm going to guess at Herstmonceux.
You're not far wrong. You've got the right idea. It is, however, this castle.
No. Hang on. Well, hang on. Is that in Britain?
It is. It's in Cornwall, I believe. Or that way, maybe Devon. Devon, sorry. Yeah, there you go. It's in Devon. This is Castle Drogo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Now, Castle Drogo in Devon, built between 1911 and 1930.
Wow.
So there you are. Yeah, brilliant. It was built by sort of rich man who lived in Devon, wanted a castle, so built one, as you do. Yeah. He lived in it for a while. during the Second World War, the guy who built it had died by this point. The people left living in it, his widow, I think. She turned it into a home where children who'd been orphaned by the Blitz could come and stay. So it became sort of an orphanage for Blitz children.
Yeah.
After the war, she dies out. It doesn't really have anywhere to go to. So very quickly gets taken up by National Trust, English Heritage, all that lot, and is now a visitor centre. So it had a very short sort of time of people living in it, but is technically the last castle built in the UK.
Yeah, you see, I was thinking you were going to say one of those sort of forts on the Thames, that they would have clicked all the boxes of being a castle. But then I thought, well, no, those are forts, because then,
exactly, I suspect this probably isn't a real castle by the terms of castles.
Well, there's more of that than there is of most English heritage castles.
Well, yes,
that's
true.
Pretty good for my book,
But there must be, like you were saying, maybe the last proper castle. I don't know what that would be, where you would sort of do that line. But that might be, if people know of what they think is the last proper castle, as in defensible for that reason, do send us a message, leave a comment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'd be really interested to know what the last real castle would be. And it also links nicely to that one in France that they're building.
That is sort of a brilliant. Yeah, that's
which is a proper castle, but.
Well, we'll put that is, if any of you don't know about that, ladies and gents, Gudelion, I think it's called, in France. They are building a medieval castle, a sort of 13th century medieval castle, and they are building it using traditional tools and traditional cranes, and it's just amazing. And they've been on it for like 20 years or something, and it's just, they've built the Great Hall, and it's just fabulous. It is like one of the best heritage projects in the world.
There's some lovely videos on YouTube where you can see what they've built and then doing stuff. They're definitely worth a look.
Yeah, make a note. We're going to put that in the comments. Yeah, Gudelion in France. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching History Teller's lively banter. We have no proper title for it, but we're just having a chat. Hope you're enjoying this, and we'll be back just after this.
History time with the History Tellers.
Ladies and gents, hello there. We are back, and it's History Tellers, me and Alex, having a bit of a chat here on a Saturday night because we can't do any performing. So instead, we thought we'd do it from our houses. Alex, how do you think it's going?
Well, we've not majorly failed at anything yet, I don't think. So
it's as organised as many of our shows, and at least we don't have to find hats and things like that. So
no, very true.
We've got everything to hand. Have you got anything else for me?
I have. I've got a nice little one. I always like these sorts of things. I've got a lovely picture for it as well. I'm going to ask you the origin of some words, and these are all words with like a naval origin, or phrases with a naval origin. I always like these sorts of things. So you can sort of, if you've got an idea, you can tell me. If not, I can sort of explain to you. And so we'll start with a good one. Do you know the origin of the phrase touch and go? Or do you know the phrase even, touch and go, as in a situation where it could be good, could be bad, sort of?
Yeah, you go, oh, it's a bit touch and go, but it came all right in the end. No.
Like all our shows. Yeah, well, this comes from when you were sailing a ship in sort of shallower waters, and you might hear the sound of the hull of the ship scraping on a sandbar that was low sort of water. A scrape and you carry on. It was a touch and go situation. You almost got grounded, but you didn't. And so sailors would say, well, that was touch and go back there.
Yeah.
And it's just spread into everyday usage.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a nice sort of
very good indeed.
Sort of, where our words come from. So I've got another one for you.
Yep.
How about being under the weather? That's a bit topical, maybe. Do you know where that one comes from? Again, it's nautical. I've got a ship.
Obviously, it's nautical. It's ship-related. You've given us that already. I'm going to say you're stuck under a kind of a cloud or a doldrums that you aren't moving from. Like that scene in Master and Commander where they're kind of becalmed and they can't move any further.
That's not a bad guess. It's not quite right. Now, I need to make sure I get this right. Obviously, being under the weather, it's not feeling good. It's feeling ill, feeling sort of down, or that sort of thing. It comes from when sailors or possibly Marines were put on watches on deck. and you'd have the man on watch would have to stand out on deck for all night, all through any sort of situation.
Yeah.
Now, on one side of the ship, you would be protected by the mast and the sails and all of the stuff between you, because you were on what was called the lee side.
Yep.
That's the side that's away from the wind and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. In the lee of the building, we say it today.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
On the other side of the ship, you're on the weather side. And this is the side where the weather is hitting. So the wind, the rain, the spray, all of that is hitting that side of the ship. And if you're on watch on that side of the ship, you're standing there with all that water and wind and things piling onto you. And so obviously you feel rubbish and quite possibly get ill afterwards. So you were feeling under the weather because you were on the weather side of the ship. So there you go.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
And I've got one final sort of nautical phrase, a windfall. We all like a windfall, don't we?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I've just received a bit of a windfall from my employer and I got given, some extra money or something like that. Yeah, go on then.
Exactly. So a windfall, an unexpected sort of a bonus or something like that. This would come when a ship was sailing along the coast against the weather.
Yep.
So the wind is sort of pushing directly against the ship. It's making hard going. However, in some situations, especially where the coastline is cliffs or mountainous, wind would sort of roll down the cliff and come off the shore and sort of give you a push. And this was a windfall, where the wind was falling off the land and giving you a sort of a push from behind, an unexpected bonus, an unexpected
very good.
push in the right direction. So that is a nautical phrase where the windfall comes from. I've got an awful lot of those tucked away in books and things. So we might, again, I'll have some more nautical phrases and their location and origin.
I like that. Is that HMS Victory on your picture?
It is, yes.
I wonder whether it was. It's obviously a big third rate or whatever they call, or first rate, isn't it? The big ones. They're called.
I believe so. Yeah.
So, yeah. But it's a bit. Yeah. I looked at it and I wasn't sure, but it's a great looking ship. And hello, incidentally, to our friends on HMS Victory. So we had a great fun.
One of our highlights of whatever year we did it in was performing right there, the Battle of the Nile.
Yeah, it was
pretty cool.
For those of us, our audience who didn't know this, we were down at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard in October, not last year, but the year before, wasn't it? And it was chucking it down.
Oh, horrible. We were definitely under the weather.
Yeah, we were. And we picked up all our stuff. We were performing right next to Victory. And we just said, can we just do it on Victory? And they went, yeah, the main gun deck is completely free. So we did our show of the Battle of the Nile. And there's one bit where we have to sort of turn and say, and Nelson opened fire with his big guns. Now, Victory wasn't at Nile, but ships like it were. And I said, and these big guns were like, and then you realise that the big gun that you were describing was kind of there. And you could go, well, like that, actually, which was a brilliant moment. We really enjoyed that. So, yeah, hello to all our friends down at the Royal Naval Museum and HMS Victory down at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. Well worth a visit when we come out of this horrible lockdown. So, Mr. Burnham, I've got a final story for you here.
Excellent.
And it's another sort of, there's a bit of a theme running through my stuff at the moment. It is a story of being isolated. So I'm going to press my button, and here we have the man in the story. So it's 75 years ago. This is a man called Hiro Onoda, and he's obviously, as you can tell by his outfit there, he is in the Japanese Imperial Army in World War II, and he gets stuck down on a place called Lubang Island. Have you covered that bottle in something to prevent... Oh, no, I thought you'd wrapped it.
Got a sticker on it.
Oh, I see. For a moment there, I thought you thought, I don't want to do any advertising. So I thought you'd done that Blue Peter 1970s thing of covering it in sticky paper.
No, yeah, I've covered up the bottle with brown paper, so you can't see what I'm drinking.
Yes, so it's actually methylated spirits. Right, so I'll go back to the story. Sorry about that, fans. Okay. So Hiro Onoda gets stationed in 1944 on Lubang Island in the Philippines. And he is ordered never surrender. Now, what might he do when the Americans arrive then, Alex, if he gets ordered never surrender?
Not surrender.
Yeah, but what did a lot of the other Japanese imperial officers do?
Well, disappeared into the jungles and fought a guerrilla war.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what he does. when the war ultimately, or when the Americans land, within a few days of the Americans landing, there are only him and 3 other men of his command who are either left alive or not surrendered. Now, he has been told, never surrender, but unusually, don't take your own life. Now, on Okinawa, if you remember Okinawa, they all were just basically just lots of suicides by the Japanese Imperial Army. He says, no, I'm not going to commit suicide. I was ordered not to. I am not going to surrender. I was ordered not to. So with 3 other men who are all, as a corporal and 2 privates, he runs into the jungle and basically sets up a HQ for him and these 3 other ranks in the jungle. Now, quite soon after the war is finished, the Americans and the Filipino sort of government that they have set up go into the woods with a police unit and just say, look, you need to come out, the war is finished. And he's got lots of ammunition, grenades and rifles. So him and his men are opening fire at the police. The police are opening fire back, and they glimpse American soldiers with the Filipino police and just go, yep, war's still happening, even though the war has stopped and the war is finished. Now, what would be the first thing you would do to these Japanese soldiers? And there's other little pockets of Japanese soldiers around Lubang Island who have gone into the woods and are not surrendering. What would you do if the war is finished and you were the Americans? You can't go and directly chat to them. What are you going to do?
I'd fly an aircraft and drop leaflets telling the Japanese that it's over.
Absolutely, you drop leaflets, and that's exactly what they do. They drop leaflets, and Onoda looks at the leaflets and just goes, yeah, they're fake. Fake news, that's not, yeah, absolutely. This has never happened. And now, you know, so now that this is, the war's been going, you know, finished for quite some time. They then see a leaflet which is signed by Tomoyuki Yamashita, who was their general, saying, look, guys, the war is over. There's absolutely no disgrace in surrendering. All your fellows have. And because they've been shot at by the police, who they think are American servicemen, they look at this leaflet and they just go, yeah, still going on. War's still going on. Leaflet's fake. And even though it's signed by the general, they just go, yeah, they've captured the general, the war is still going on. It's now 1949. They are now fighting a guerrilla war, and every so often they are breaking into the Filipino villages, and they are burning their supplies of rice because they presumably think that that rice will then feed the advancing Americans. So the war's been over now for 4 years. But the Filipino people are getting a bit annoyed at these guys who are just occasionally appearing out of the woods and destroying their agriculture. So then one of them surrenders. He says, I don't want to be with you anymore. I'm hating this. And he lives on his own for about 6 months, and then he surrenders. Now this, you would think, at this point, we're now in sort of like 1952. You would think that they would sit there and just go, look, our mate's cleared off, let's jack it in. No, they carry on. So they still carry on. And now family photographs and letters are dropped to them. And they look at them and they say, yep, they're all fake. They're all fake. They are still not surrendering. 1954, a search party killed one of the remaining 3 in a shootout. Now, I would sort of say, don't go in there armed and ready to shoot, because that's probably not helping their, you know, their will to surrender, which leaves only Hiro Onoda and Private Kozuka left. And at this point, they are still operating this kind of guerrilla war against the Filipinos. They're creating problems for Filipino farmers. They're creating problems for Filipino police. And this goes on for 18 years. With them living in the woods. 18 years. It is now 1972, and Kozuka is killed in, inevitably, another shootout. So now Onoda is on his own. And in 1974, a Japanese student adventurer turns up with shaggy, long, hippie hair called Norio Suzuki. And I love this bit. Norio Suzuki, he has a bucket list of things he wants to do. He's only young, on the bucket list, it is find Lieutenant Onoda, see a panda, or find the abominable snowman.
Oh, it's a good list.
In that order.
Yeah.
So, luck's out, because on his first attempt to find Lieutenant Onoda, he finds Lieutenant Onoda in the jungle.
Doesn't have a panda with him by any
No,
chance.
he doesn't.
No, that's a shame.
Or an abominable snowman.
No, that's a shame.
No, so I presume he then, after he's found Onoda, he just doesn't bother with the panda or the abominable snowman, because he's lucked out on the top prize, because that was in order of preference, by the way.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, you know, when you go into a small village area in the jungle and go, anybody seen the crazy Japanese soldier guy who lives in the woods? They all go, yeah, every couple of weeks he just is seen in the woods. And we kind of let him get on with it unless he shoots at us when we shoot at him. And he still thinks the war is going on. So he is known. It's not like he's this kind of mythical man who lives in the woods. He is known, but he's the crazy Japanese man who just won't surrender. So now Suzuki goes back to Tokyo and just goes, hey, look, I found Lieutenant Onoda. And there he is with him. And Onoda's grinning away, just going, yeah, look, this is my new mate. He described him as the hippie lad who turned up. That is a working Arisaka rifle that's really broken and manky, but he's kept it really clean. He's got loads of ammunition and all that kind of stuff. And he says, look, I found him. This is him with me. And he's not, it doesn't look like he's had a particularly hard life. He's grinning away there. I would also say, testimony to Japanese uniforms.
It's held up very well.
Isn't it, Justin? There's a photograph coming up where you look at it and you go, wow, I know, you wouldn't get that if you bought a reenactment uniform today. That'd be falling apart in ages. So, so he then says, look, I found this guy. We need to get him to surrender. So now they find Major Yoshima Taniguchi, I should say, who was his major, who is his direct orders from. So they get
who's now elderly and retired, I'm assuming. This is 20 years later.
Who's pulled out of kind of retirement. He's like, what? And they take him to the jungles of Lubang Island, whereupon he then wanders about just going, you've got to surrender. At this point, he finally comes out of the jungle, and there he is giving his sword to the president of the Philippines. So he is finally surrendering.
Officially surrendering.
With all of the world's press around him. Now, the Filipino people just go, hang on, why is everybody treating him like a bit of a hero? He's killed local Filipino people. He's murdered them. So the Filipino government say, well, yeah, I know, but he thought the war was still going on, so that's allowed. And the Japanese government just go, oh, isn't he brilliant? Let's not give him any prosecution at all, because he was doing it under Japanese rules. Now, there's his uniform, and it's still, it's a bit faded, but it's held out reasonably well, as you say. And he's still surrendering and all of that. Now, it has to be said, there is another guy who hangs out for slightly longer, who's a guy called Teruo Nakamura, but he is basically, he just lives on an island, and then someone says, and it's like a couple of months afterwards, and he just says, oh, fine, I didn't realise. And that's not much of the story. It's like a month later. But this guy has basically held out without surrender for months and years and years and years. Anyway, so he goes back to Japan, and he doesn't like Japan in the 70s. He gets there, and he doesn't like it because he preferred the old values of old Japan, like it was when he left. So he moves to Brazil to raise cows. In 1984, he moves back to Japan because he's heard a story of a young Japanese man who murdered his mum and dad. And he thinks, oh, Japan's really gone downhill. I need to go back and sort out the youth. So he goes back from raising cows. He goes back to Japan, and he starts the kind of nature camp for Japanese youngsters to go to, a bit like your castle where, sad kids go who've lost their mum and dad. He does sort of the same thing for Japanese kids. I have to say, he seems to be all right when you read this bit, because he goes back to Lubang Island in 1996 and he gives them $10,000 to a local school. And you go, oh, brilliant. He sounds like he's completely changed his entire way of thinking. And then you realise that he was in a gang that was really into Japanese militarism at that point. So he dies of heart failure in 2014. There he is, before he died.
Wow.
And yeah, that is the man who just didn't know the war had finished. So, yeah, what is a pretty amazing story, I have to say. And did he know the war had finished? Was he just being a bit strange?
After, for a war to go on for 20 years or whatever he thought it was going on, that's a big old thing. You'd have thought he would have expected more in the way of battles on his island or something in that time.
Yeah, now, I've heard varying stories that he was looking up and he was seeing aircraft that were flying into Filipino airfields or airports, and he was saying, oh, look, they've got American aircraft up there now and all of this kind of stuff. Whether that is true or not, or just sort of post-war duff history, I do not know. But you get to that point where you look at this and, yeah, it's an amazing story of a man who kind of just hung out, really. Was he kind of completely remote from the world? Well, not really, because they all knew about him. It wasn't like he was just a wild man living in the trees. So I suspect he had a lot more contact with the Filipino villagers, but they regarded him...
He might have just liked it.
What, him?
Yeah, might have just liked being living in a cave, and it was a good way of just carrying on.
Yeah. And maybe. So that is my number of stories. I've had a blast, I have to say, Mr. Burnham.
Very good.
It's been great fun. Should we do this again?
I think we should. We'll try and do this on regular occasions, and that way history tellers, people who would normally see us at shows and events around the country, can still watch us on here.
Keep a bit current. Keep a bit current with our audience.
What do you mean?
Well, I think keep a bit, while we can't go out and... I should be...
Yes.
I mean, I had an event this weekend, which obviously I couldn't go to, and it's just nice to be able to have a bit of a virtual bond with our audience and say hi to all our old friends out there. So if any of you who come up to us to see us at Chalk Valley, we shall miss you this year, but we will be back, ladies and gents.
Yeah, and obviously we'd be very appreciative. We're going to put this video on our Facebook page. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel. So please do find those, like them, share them amongst friends, subscribe to the channel, History Tellers page, all that sort of thing, so you can keep up to date. We'll try and do this with reasonable regularity, try and get something new on a regular basis, and see how it goes from there. And keep in touch with us. Do write in the comments, let us know if you know something about something we've said this time round. You could sort of add in the bits that we were missing, or if you've got a particularly great story you want to share with us, do that as well.
Absolutely.
We're always looking for interesting bits of history that we can talk about and share, and it would be good to have that engagement, like Ab said, keep in touch with people who want to be seeing in the real world, but we can't do. So please do like us, share us, and come back for more.
Absolutely. And ladies and gents, I hope you have enjoyed our History Tellers cheerful banter. As Alex says, find us on Facebook, find us on social media, come and have us, say hello to us on all the stuff that he runs. I have no idea how to do it. And in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, have a successful, safe lockdown. Stay in your home, save some lives. And ladies and gents, we've had a blast. I'm Abs. This is Alex of the History Tellers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for watching.
So don't forget to share this video, like the History Tellers Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more History Tellers conversations in the coming weeks.